At an age when game developers are constantly crafting worlds which are large and more intricate, it is incredibly crucial to direct your players' attention in the right direction. You want anyone to be able to pick up your game and navigate the world at the pace you've decided. It is never desirable to have your players get stuck on something or get lost and have to find their way again over many tedious hours. If this happens multiple times, it can often turn the players away from playing that game. And when talking about this, there aren't many better examples than EA DICE's 2008 release of Mirror's Edge. One of the few games where first-person platforming is actually made really good. Now, for the sake of this video, it doesn't even matter whether you believe that this game was great or whether you absolutely hated it, because one thing I'm sure we can both agree on is that it has a very polarizing design that helps it stand out and is still praised by many gamers years after it's been released. So how does a game with such unique design help its players find their way through its often very intricate levels? Well, today I'm going to look at exactly what Mirror's Edge teaches us about guiding players' attention. Now, to help structurize this video and make it a bit easier to follow, we're gonna divide it into what are, in my opinion, three most important categories when it comes to player attention. These are gonna be distinct areas, highlighting of objects, and lastly, an orientation point or multiple points. Now let's start from the beginning. What do I mean by distinct locations? Now, while you might see that Mirror's Edge has a very consistent design all throughout its locations and two games, one thing many players overlook is actually how distinct some of the game's areas are. And this is obviously a design decision made to help players get understanding of where they are located in the world or in progress to the game's storyline. In contrast to the very white and bluish outside, you can have these dark, rich, colorful pink, orange, red areas all the way in the inside, and this very much helps give each place a unique feel and also break up the monotony a little bit, because if the color palette stayed the same all throughout, it would get pretty boring after a while and the levels would start to look the same. This way, the developer is able to break up the entire game into multiple sections, and it also helps if at some point you decide to revisit the place, or in the case of the first game, just do a second playthrough. Now let's go on to point number 2, and this one might seem pretty obvious to you, because if we're talking about highlighting objects. Now in Mirror's Edge, this is actually done fairly, I don't want to say obnoxiously, but that is kind of the word. The objects that you should be traversing that will help you get to your destination are often highlighted red, which is very much an interesting color choice, as in many games red is associated with danger. However, by repeatedly conditioning the player to see red in juxtaposition to all the white backgrounds, the game teaches the players to use those features, navigate them, get the flow of the level, and get from point A to point B as fast as they can. Some of the features also lose their color once they've been used, again helping the player understand that they no longer need to use that feature again. And while in Mirror's Edge this is very obvious, many other games actually do this without it being so clear. Next time you play your favorite game, maybe look for the random light placements, which are not random at all, which are pointing at the objects or doors you need to interact with. Maybe see how that object you can pick up is all of a sudden in the middle of the darkness and that object shines to really guide you towards it. It's subtle things like this, combination of color, lighting, and composition of the objects and geometry in the level, that really help in all games, and especially Mirror's Edge, to get you through the sometimes really complicated levels. Now my last point here is going to be the point of orientation, or multiple points of orientation. I touched a bit on this in my Team Fortress 2 video, where I explained that this is pretty much a point, a building, a structure, or a piece of geometry in the level that helps you orient on your map. The general idea is that wherever you are on the map, you should be able to just look around and understand your position towards your goal, where you started, and where you want to go. Now, if you pay close attention to the levels in Mirror's Edge, you'll often realize that there are many unique buildings surrounding the levels you are running through, the shapes of which really help you orient whenever you get yourself stuck. See, let's say I got into combat and I got turned around in between all of these crates or ventilation shafts. I can simply look around and say, oh, look, I remember going to my goal, which was in between those two distinctly blue buildings. I'm just gonna head that way. This one is a lot more subtle than the other ones, but that is kind of the point. The game is not trying to get you to go to those buildings. They're mostly there to help you determine which way you want to go. Like I said, what the player is always asking is, where am I? Where do I want to go? And how do I get there? So the developers are trying to answer those three questions as subtly as possible. And this doesn't just have to be buildings, it can be billboards, it can be different structures, it can be planes, zeppelins, it depends on the type of the game. It can even be something as subtle as, let's say in Battlefield, when your capture point has a flag indicating where the center of that capture point is. So, let's quickly recap. How does Mirror's Edge guide its players through the intricate levels? How does it direct their attention to the features that are important? Well, firstly, it makes sure to distinguish the individual areas from one another, using colors, lighting, and different geometry to help you understand what location you're currently in and how far you are through the storyline in case of the first game. Second of all, they highlight objects of interest. This is common in many games. If there is a feature the developer thinks you should be using, it's probably highlighted some way, whether it's using the lighting or directing your attention to it using the surrounding items, or in the case of Mirror's Edge, simply painting the object red. And lastly, it heavily relies on using orientation points. Maps are surrounded by distinct items, whether it's the blooming cherry blossom trees or different interestingly shaped buildings in the background, colorful billboards on the sides of the wall, objects that will stick and cling in your memory, so if you get turned around on the map you can quickly get your bearings and continue heading towards your direction. And that is all I have to say in the topic, guys. Like I said previously, many of these things are practices that are commonly used by a lot of games out there. So, if you want an interesting exercise, maybe go play your favorite game and see if you can spot any of these. I'm also not trying to say that Mirror's Edge does the best job of any game ever when it comes to directing the player's attention. I simply felt the simplistic art design in contrast to the really bright highlights and different architecture can help support my points in this explanation. And no, I am not going to touch on the point of whether I like the second game or not, because that's probably a topic for a different video, which kind of, that gives me an interesting idea. Anyways, if you're interested in learning more about the topic of map design, I might suggest you check out my Team Fortress 2 video where I talk about multiplayer map design, or if you just like design of games in general, maybe check out the playlist and see if there's anything else you fancy. That is it for me. I wish you all a beautiful rest of the day, and I'm gonna see all of you in the next video I make. Bye bye.